Okay, so now we go to our first plenary speaker, Gerry Mooney from the Open University. I first met Gerry when I was a student here at Paisley 20 years ago, and the first memory I have of him was standing up Paisley High Street with a sandwich board and a loudspeaker. And he hasn't aged a day. Gerry has written widely on issues of poverty, class, inequality, and no doubt his talk to us today will be as inspirational as a lot of his books are. So without further ado, I will pass you on to Gerry Mooney.
Hello everyone, welcome to Paisley, a town I actually live in, and the reason I'm here to do the plenary is because it only cost them £2.50 bus fares to get me here, so I'm delighted to see Swan exercising fiscal responsibility in these times of austerity. It's really good to be here, and it's really good to acknowledge the absolute huge size of this event. I remember Ian and Michael had me speaking at a Swan event at Glasgow Cali University about 3 or 4 years ago, maybe even more, and it was about half. It was a big size then, but it was about half the size of what we've got this year. So it's absolutely phenomenal to see the growth of Swan throughout the United Kingdom. I want to say a wee bit about my title and what I'm going to do first of all, but just to say that the slides apparently will be on the Swan website, and I know this has been filmed, and once I'll be able to edit it down to 5 minutes, we'll put it on the Swan website as well. I'm going to speak for about 45 minutes, give or take, and then hopefully there'll be time for questions and so on thereafter. But let me say something about the title. In particular, I want to focus on Scotland in the title, because clearly what I'm going to talk about by and large is very much from the position of things that are happening in Scotland at the moment. But I think the key thing for us all to take away from this is that what's happening in Scotland at the moment may have unique things about Scotland, but there's also issues and debates and struggles going on in Scotland that have a resonance beyond Scotland, way beyond Scotland. So even though I'm going to speak a lot about what's going on in Scotland at a general level, I hope that as you're listening to me, you're thinking about how that might connect with struggles and issues from your own part of the world as well. But nonetheless, we want to focus initially a wee bit on Scotland and provide the general context. So, independence, anti-austerity, and the struggle for a different Scotland. You know, I've got austerity in inverted commas. And the reason for that is it often appears that austerity is this very value-free technical term. Who could be against austerity? It's just the way things are. Austerity is a hugely value-laden term, and I think we should be very, very cautious about how we use it. I'll come back to that a little later. Let me say something, first of all, about Paisley. Yeah? Not only has it got a good fish and chip shop, as Ian has said, but there are phenomenal radical traditions in this town. Paisley is a town many of you probably haven't heard of, but you've probably heard of the Paisley pattern. And Paisley's history is very much tied up with the weaving and textile industries, all of which unfortunately have gone. But at one time there were huge mills all across Paisley. They're all gone. And the town, to be very honest with you, like many other towns in the west of Scotland and elsewhere, has seen better days. But I think one of the key things about Paisley we can chart over its history is this radical tradition. In 1820, not just in Paisley, but across Scotland, particularly the west of Scotland, there was what became known as the Scottish Insurrection. Workers in the textile and other industries taking strike action, fighting for better terms and conditions. The 1820 Society talked about Scotland free or a desert. But they weren't talking about Scotland there in any nationalistic terms. This was very much what a workers' Scotland, a Scotland in which workers would be, benefiting much more from their produce than they were at the time. So that's one of the great traditions of Paisley. The other one, a bit later on, was written about the First World War. And Paisley was very much part of the period of the Red Clydeside. That's when you get the world's first shop stewards movement, huge strikes in Glasgow and the Greater Glasgow area. You've got famous left-wing politicians emerging from that time, and one of the most notable from Paisley was Willie Gallagher, who wrote this fabulous book, Revolt in the Clyde. He ended up being a communist MP in Fife. And of course, more recently, we'll come on to the issue about independence. You'll see the very nice Paisley pattern here. Paisley voted yes, unfortunately Renfrewshire, which is the constituency which we're located, was marginally a no vote to independence, but we'll come back to that, I'm sure. But anyway, welcome to Paisley. So it's a town with huge radical traditions, and I'm hopeful that in terms of the Swan debates today and tomorrow, those radical traditions will be enhanced much more for today. So, let's start looking at this. Here's Glasgow George Square, a place I'm sure familiar to many of you. Here is a rally taking place of about 5,000 people the night before the Scottish independence referendum last year. Obviously you can see a lot of Scottish flags flying there. There's a few Catalan flags, flags from the Basque Country, flags from other parts of the world. So I want you to focus on that image and hold that image in your mind as much as you can, because I'm going to come back to that at the very end. But there's George Square, Glasgow, site of numerous rallies around the independence referendum and the independence debate. So it's exciting times to be in Scotland. There's a new political landscape, there's a new environment of heightened political debate. We've seen the rise of the Scottish Nationalist Party from virtually nowhere to being the dominant party in Scotland, and we've witnessed the near collapse of the Labour Party. In this area, Paisley, for most of the past 100 years or so, was solidly Labour, as was much of the rest of the west of Scotland. Few of us now would put any money on that being the case after the general election in several weeks' time. So we have a lot of political excitement, but alongside that political excitement, there are ongoing day-to-day struggles that many of you will be involved in, around different aspects of care and social work. And these are also related in different ways to the general social and political context in which we live. And in particular, it's related to opposition to austerity, to various forms of privatisation, and numerous attacks on wages and conditions. Now, those issues, of course, will inform the general election in a few weeks' time. The outcome in Scotland is already predicted to have massive UK consequences. For those of you from Scotland, I mean, you'll be forgiven to shake yourselves a wee bit, thinking, why is it Scotland's on the news all the time? It was never ever on the news to the extent that it is now. And the idea of the SNP being on the main BBC or ITV news was, well, that was beyond anybody's ambitions or hopes. But now you see the SNP in there, Scotland there as the front piece in terms of developments around the general election. That is obviously to do with the ongoing debates about the future of Scotland and the future of the UK. But the first thing I really want to emphasise, I'm going to try and unpack this a little bit more, is that these debates, these arguments, are not simply only about constitutional change. It's not simply a question of leadership in terms of a Scottish government or leadership in terms of a UK government. It's not simply about borders. It's about much more. What kind of society do we want to see in Scotland? What kind of society do we, as activists, want to see across the world, in our own countries, but at a global level as well? So one of the great mistakes is to look at the independence debate here simply and only as a question of constitutional change. It's much broader than that, as we'll see. Obviously, as Ian has said, there are colleagues and incumbents here from across the UK, from Ireland, from Europe and beyond. you'll be well aware then of the uprisings and social movements emerging elsewhere, in Spain, in Greece, other parts of the UK, other parts of Europe. There was huge marches in Ireland recently against the imposition of water charges. These are all connected in some way with opposition to the kinds of societies that we have now. And in this part of the world, in Scotland, what we see is that these consequences are having major UK-wide implications, not least for the Labour parties or the Social Democratic parties in these countries, but also for the ruling establishments of Scotland and the UK as a whole. So what I want to focus on, well, I want to look at this new political landscape of contemporary Scotland, and I want to just look at some of the myths and realities of the Scottish independence campaign. Was it a nationalist movement? Is the question I want you to think about. What were the key arguments of the Yes for Independence campaign? Then I want to reflect on that campaign more generally, where are we now, and look forward to the general election in 5 or 6 weeks' time. Now, I'm providing the general context. I'm not a social worker. I was told to make sure I said that. I'm not a social worker. So, sorry about that. When I was a student here at Paisley many moons ago, I went to the wrong room and ended up as a social policy academic. If I'd gone next door, I could have been sitting there. But anyway, I'm not a social worker, but what I hope I'm doing is providing the context that will help inform the other debates and discussions that will take place over the next 2 or 3 days. The other thing I want to really do is debunk, criticise some of the myths that surround the discussion of contemporary Scotland. This is a land of myths, some historic, some recent, some getting made on a day-to-day basis. I want to really question some of them. And in particular, I want to look at the issue of the SNP. Are they the great social democratic progressive force that we've been led to believe, or is there something else there which is problematic? And I want to finish by saying that we need to go beyond not only a nationalistic vision of Scotland, but we need to go beyond nationalism wherever it's taking place. That nationalism in itself is not the answer to combating austerity, inequality, and so on. So let's reflect first of all on that independence referendum. It's hard to believe that this time last year, in April 2014, many of us in this room would have been out there campaigning. I suspect the majority on the yes side, but obviously not people on the no side. But nonetheless, campaigning around the demand for Scottish independence. So let me just put that in one context. That was the first time in 300 years since the United Kingdom was formed was the future of the UK really looking pretty risky. There was a huge uncertainty about the future, not only of Scotland, but of the UK. Now, if somebody had said to Ian or myself 10, 20 years ago, when you were in my class here many moons ago, there's going to be a referendum on Scottish independence in 2014, I would have thought you were a nutter. Yeah? Not PC terms, I thought you would be challenged in some ways. Yeah? That's what we say to the old youth, challenged. Yeah? You'd have been challenged in a whole number of different ways, because it was just not on anybody's agenda. Even when we got Scottish devolution in 1999, the idea that by 2014 we'd be voting on independence, who could ever contemplate that, was not on the agenda. And arguably, mid-SNP victory after 2007, when they first formed the Scottish Government, midway through that period in government, you would never have thought a Scottish independence referendum was on the cards. But we've had it, we've gone through it, it's behind us, but it's not completely behind us. And one of the debates happening at the moment is, will there be another Scottish independence referendum? We'll come back to that. Anyway, let's look at some of the key things. September the 18th last year, 85% of those eligible to vote turned out and voted in the Scottish independence referendum. The highest in any major UK voting event since 1918. As you know, I'm assuming most of you know, the no vote won by 55% to 45%. I want to focus on the yes side of it. 1.6 million people in Scotland voted to take Scotland out of the United Kingdom. I mean, that was, by anyone's imagination, that was a fantastic result for the Yes campaign, because in April last year, Ian and I and other colleagues here were not sitting contemplating 45%. In terms of the opinion polls, Yes was looking around 30, 33, 34%, nowhere near 45%. So 45% for Scottish independence was a massive result, no matter what way you look at it. And of course, for those of us who were involved in the campaign, the days after the announcement was pretty disappointing, downbeat and so on. But nonetheless, thereafter you would have thought actually that the Yes campaign had won, given the shifts that have taken place within Scottish society. But one of the key shifts is around the SNP. Because many of us were brought up thinking of the SNP as a crowd of nationalist nutters, dressed themselves up in Braveheart tartan, playing to all the Scottish things that most of us cringe about. But you wouldn't say that about the SNP today. They have transformed, or have been transformed, as a result of other things happening within Scotland. So, for me and for others, I don't think you can separate out the rise of the SNP with the widespread opposition to austerity, the growing unpopularity of the UK Tory Liberal Democrat coalition, and general opposition to welfare reform. So in many ways the SNP have been the beneficiaries of this widening anger about the future shape and direction of UK society. There's also in Scotland huge anger about the Labour Party and the so-called Labour opposition, who really only offer an alternative kind of austerity. So the Tory austerity is one thing, but Labour says, well, we won't go down the Tory road. Yes, we need cuts and we need austerity, but not as bad as the Tories. Different kind of austerity. So how did that come to relate to the movement for Scottish independence? Let's look at some of the myths. One of the great myths, you can pick this up in a lot of newspapers, even to this day. People trying to account for the rise of the SNP, trying to account for developments here in Scotland. And one of the great myths is that this was a nationalist movement. This is about the exercise of national identity. It's about people feeling that they are more Scottish than they've ever been. Right? So here are three quotes. I could put many more up. Here's Will Hutton, who will be known to some of you as one of the key writers in the Observer newspaper. Here he is on the 7th of September last year, just a couple of weeks before the referendum. He says, if Britain can't find a way of sticking together, it is the death of the liberal Enlightenment before the atavistic forces of nationalism and ethnicity. A dark omen for the 21st century. Britain will cease as an idea, we will all be diminished. Yeah? So, obviously you'd be in tears reading that, but nonetheless, here you go. Then we have the Financial Times, that bastion of left-wing radical thought. The SNP has reawakened the allegiance of the tribe. I'm always astonished that they missed an opportunity there to say the allegiance of the clan. Any opportunity to throw in a Scottishism would have been welcomed by them, I'm sure. And then we have John McTernan, former Labour Special Advisor, worked with Tony Blair many moons ago in the new Labour government, writing in the Daily Mail, of all papers. Populism is sweeping Europe, and the UK is not immune, he says. The SNP surge is part of this phenomenon. The characteristics of putting the nation and its needs and aspirations above all other calls on solidarity. So what we get with these kind of comments, there's many others that come out almost on a daily or weekly basis, is the SNP and the Yes campaign for Scottish independence are represented as an essentially ethnic nationalist movement. Anti-English, it reflects and echoes a feeling of Scottishness, whatever that might be. Now, this is hugely mistaken. But let me give you one other quote or issue that's coming up here as well. Here's Jonathan Fiedland writing in The Guardian, 21st of November last year, so this is post the independence referendum. He says, just look at the two surging movements in UK politics, the Scottish National and UK independence parties. The latter now buoyed by winning its second MP in the Rochester by-election in southern England. The SNP insists that it represents a kinder, gentler, more civic nationalism than UKIP, but both mind national solidarity and the rising sense that a hated and distant capital, Westminster in one case, Brussels in the other, is thwarting the people's true destiny. And Fiedland is not the first, and he's certainly not the last commentator to try and draw parallels between the rise of the SNP and the rise of UKIP. Yes, there was opposition to Westminster. Yes, the SNP do play on the notion of a nation, the Scottish nation, but there, I think we can draw to halt any comparison with UKIP. I mean, I find myself sometimes talking at events like this almost defending the SNP, something I thought I would never be doing in my entire life. But one thing I would say about the SNP is they are not an ethnic nationalist movement. Indeed, they're probably quite unique in that sense. Yes, they talk about Scottish nationalism, but the whole Yes movement cannot be reduced to the SNP and to some of the members of the SNP who come out with that way of thinking specifically. What was the independence campaign about then? Some of you may remember this leaflet. This was a Yes campaign leaflet. What I want you to do is just look down the two lists of things that are being compared. Here we have David Cameron on the left-hand side, Alex Salmond on the Yes, right-hand side. Look at the issues there. Prescription charges in England, free prescriptions in Scotland, tuition fees £9,000 per academic year in England, no tuition fees in Scotland. What's a new Trident missile submarine on the River Clyde? You'll be happy to know that the Trident missile submarine system is only 20 miles away from where we are now, so do feel safe knowing that. So if you get lost tonight after Waxhaw Corners, just remember that we have nuclear submarines nearby protecting you. So that is one of the great things of living in the west of Scotland. Here's Alex Salmond saying we'll have no nuclear weapons in Scotland. There'll be no Scottish money devoted to the replacement of the Trident missile system, costing £100 billion plus. But when you look down those lists, particularly on the Yes side, okay, there's a reliance on Scots hands, working for Scotland. What is this thing, Scotland? But nonetheless, what we have here is a unification of something called the UK, which doesn't exist in any unified sense at all. But the thing I want to draw out, particularly from the Yes side, is there's nothing there that you would identify as being peculiarly nationalist. The issues are not nationalist in any narrow sense whatsoever. Yeah? These are issues that many of us in this room, I'm sure, if not all of us in some way, would campaign for and would fight for. Okay, take out a couple of bottom lines about Scotland or Scots. We would identify with most of those things there. No tuition fees, council tax fees, and so on. I mean, if anything, it's not radical enough. But this is a huge departure for the SNP. You wouldn't have got this from the SNP 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Right? But for the Yes movement as a whole, these were the issues. It's not about I'm more Scottish than you, and I could play more bagpipe music than you can play, and I like more square sausages than you do, and I have iron brew every day, you don't, I'm more Scottish than you. Complete and utter nonsense. Nobody is running around in many parts of Scotland with a Scottish flag saying, oh, we need to vote yes because we're Scots together, and that's just great. It's not like that at all. There's other things going on which are more significant. As we know, the referendum outcome, as I said, was a no vote, 55 to 45%. It's very uneven geographically across different parts of Scotland. The one thing to pull out here is that the more affluent and elderly the population of an area, the more likely it was to vote no. Conversely, the poorer and more disadvantaged and younger the age profile of the area, the more likely it was to vote yes. Every Scottish constituency in Glasgow and Dundee voted yes. And what we see is that the vote for yes was much higher in traditional Labour Party heartlands in the west of Scotland and elsewhere. Here are the most deprived areas in Scotland with the overall share. Glasgow at this end, Inverclyde, Greenock just down the road there, Dundee. So this is the share of deprivation. Glasgow always stands out here as the worst in terms of its overall share of deprivation. Let's look at the areas that voted yes. Yeah. Now, you find Glasgow, Dundee, Western Bartonshire across the Clyde there, North Lanarkshire to the east of Glasgow. You can then throw in North Ayrshire and Inverclyde, marginal no winning seats. So there is a real correlation then between deprivation and poverty and likelihood to vote yes. Yeah? And these are not figures out of the Socialist Worker or radical and critical social work. These are figures that are produced by the experts, so-called, on voting patterns. So there is something connecting then. People in disadvantaged areas voting yes against people in affluent areas tending to vote no. Now, of course, that's a sweeping generalisation, but that is the pattern. And let me tell you now, the big housing estates of Paisley in West Central Scotland, playing the bagpipes, saying you like Iron Brew, dressing yourself in tartan, isn't going to win you anything. Right? So the so-called traditional nationalist message is irrelevant in these parts of Scotland. It doesn't connect. What does connect is the message of opposition to austerity and opposition to welfare reform. So when we look at the yes movement, it was a mass social movement. I won't go through all of this, but it was a movement opposed to welfare reforms, opposed to austerity, opposed to neoliberalism, opposed to wars, nuclear energy, nuclear weapons. Those were the issues that brought together a huge range of organisations and campaigning groups. A lot of different organisations came together. Women for Independence, Radical Independence Campaign, the Green Party, the Scottish Socialist Party, service user movements and groups, and so on and so on. Now that would not have been possible had it simply been about nationalism or Scottish independence. There was something else there, bringing people together and fueling this. And when nationalist aspirations, when nationalist language emerged, it was tied up with social justice and social welfare issues. Why do you want independence? Well, I want a better Scotland where there's no austerity. It wasn't just like, I want an independent Scotland full stop. I want an independent Scotland with no nuclear weapons, with no Tories, and so on and so on. So it was the linking of an opposition to austerity with the idea that a different Scotland could be manufactured, different from the general neoliberal regime that exists across the UK today. Let me also say it's amazing the number of people who talk about the SNP and the Yes campaign as being nationalistic. And often the people who say this are from British nationalist backgrounds. And I would say that British nationalism, in all shapes and forms, is a much more virulent, nasty thing than Scottish nationalism. Not that I'm saying we should pick one or the other, but nonetheless, you often find people say, oh, it's about nationalism, it's about nationalism. Well, you're just a British nationalist. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I was taking for granted of Britain, we defended the UK, but I'm not a British nationalist. Yeah? Let's have a Trident nuclear missile submarine. Let's send British armed forces around the world to be involved in wars that they should have nothing to do with. Oh, but I'm not a British nationalist. Really? Right? So that was often denied. So the Yes campaign went beyond the sort of Braveheart images, went beyond the sort of tartan stereotypical images of Scotland as a mass movement mobilising tens of thousands of people, particularly young people, for the first time. And to be honest with you, not since the poll tax rebellions in this part of the world in the late 1980s was there the level of political debate that we saw then and now, because it's a continuing debate. What has happened then since September last year? On September the 18th, the SNP had a membership of 25,500. As of last week, James, they had 105,000. So a huge increase in membership. Every day another opinion poll comes out. There's one came out this morning showing that the SNP are on line to win the vast majority of seats in Scotland, sitting around about 46-47%. Labour 29%, although the Conf poll this morning have gone below 26%. Yeah? So Labour's in real crisis. Tied to that, people do want, the majority seem to want, another independence referendum. So if we end up with a Conservative-led government, either single government or coalition government, there is certainly a demand in Scotland for another referendum within 5 years or so. So the issues that came up last year have not gone away. And there's the map, 2010 general election, the one Conservative seat, that's one seat. Labour Scotland is very much central, west central Scotland. Bit of Tayside, bit of Aberdeen, Labour. The rest was SNP and Liberal Democrat. Look at the projection for this year, if those opinion polls are correct. Some Labour seats here around about Glasgow area, a couple in mid-Fife, and that is it. Yeah? The rest of the country looks like it's going to be an SNP wipeout. Now, I don't really believe it's going to be as big as that, but I do expect Labour to lose a huge tranche of seats here in Scotland. Why the increase in support for independence? Well, this plays to a lot of myths. And we tell ourselves myths a lot of time here in Scotland. And these are myths that we dismiss at the same time as we use them. They're very powerful myths. That there's something about us as Scots that makes us a national community with other Scots. We are committed to social democracy, we are socially just, we are left-leaning, we're committed to equality, we're committed to fairness, and we're born with that, because that's us as Scots. You know? So anybody who plays with Scottish is really progressive and social justice, and you can't dismiss that, but still a powerful way of thinking. I always remember people say, "Oh, we're not racist in Scotland. It's the English who are racist," which is a fantastic quote if there was ever one. Yeah. So the support for Scottish nationalism, support for the SNP and for the Yes campaign plays to this sense of Scotland as a uniquely progressive national entity. But there's something else going on there. Well, here is two newspaper headlines. Here is the Sunday Herald, which is a Yes to Independence support paper. Nicola Sturgeon, David Cameron. Divided Britain. Progressive Britain, Scotland. Progressive, hostile Britain, the UK. Here is the national newspaper just set up after the independence referendum, a pro-independence newspaper, talking about the additional powers, additional devolution to Scotland will not really deliver. So it's this idea of two Britons. Progressive Scotland, non-progressive UK. We must be progressive. Why? Well, you're Scottish, so we're obviously progressive. Yeah. This ties in with the idea that Scotland is a land of milk and honey. Isn't it wonderful? I spend a lot of my time in a very strange place called Milton Keynes. Anybody from Milton Keynes here? Yes. Yes, yeah. Well, I'm there all the time because the Open University headquarters is in Milton Keynes, and I have to say, I think it's a very strange place. Anyway, that's me being parochial for Paisley, you know. But it just strikes me as a strange place. When I go to meetings down in Milton Keynes, my colleagues will say to me, "Oh, it must be great up in Scotland, Gerry." Why? "Oh, you've got all this wonderful stuff, you know, and you've got free this and free that and free the next thing. Isn't it great?" Of course, there are differences, huge differences. But the way in which they represent Scotland just doesn't connect with me. Yeah? Their vision of what Scotland is, a land of milk and honey, which is not a new thing. It's been going on for about 10, 15 years. Misses the point that, you know, in Scotland, 1 million people today haven't got adequate housing in Scotland. Maybe the Scottish population is 5.2 million. So 1 million people don't have decent, adequate housing. 250,000 children are not properly fed. 400,000 adults lack proper clothing, and so on and so on. Right? Alongside that, public attitude surveys show that the majority of people in Scotland think that the gap between rich and poor is far too big. And what surveys also show is that your likelihood of supporting independence was very much based on the assumption or the belief that only Scottish independence would tackle wealth and income inequality. Yeah? So again, it's not about nationalism, it's about this projection of social justice into an independent Scotland. Scotland's a very wealthy country. Now, a lot of people wouldn't have you believe that. It's like a bastion of deprivation and poverty. It's a very wealthy country. Between 2006 2012, the most recent figures, the top 2% in Scotland own 17% of all personal wealth. The top 10%, 44% of all wealth. Anyone's imagination, that's a hugely unequal society. That's okay because they're all Scots, so that's fine. I don't mind you owning half of Scotland because you're Scottish and we can go and watch Scottish football together or sing Scottish songs together. That's okay, I don't mind you exploiting your workforce and all that. As long as you're a Scot who's exploiting, that's fine, you know. So it's the idea of one Scotland. It's complete utter nonsense. The idea of a Scottish national community where we all believe and think the same thing, complete utter nonsense. Yeah? So you find in different ways in Scotland, anti-poor, anti-welfare attitudes exist in Scotland. It's not just an alien import from England, as the SNP used to argue. If Scotland's independent, everybody would love the poor. Well, I want Scotland's independent where there's no poverty. Not that everybody loves the poor. So the nationalist message is very limited in certain ways. Now, the SNP have positioned themselves as an anti-austerity party. But what I wanted to focus on here is this notion of Scotland, the SNP for Scotland. Westminster will not reform and end austerity. Stand with us or Scotland will never forgive you. What Scotland is she talking about? Is it the Scotland of the directors of the Royal Bank of Scotland? Is it the Scotland of the people who run privatised care companies? Is it the Scotland of striking workers in Glasgow today? It's a very different Scotland. So the idea that we have Scotland together as an entity, very powerful, hugely problematic, as you can see. So behind the rhetoric, I'm going to start to wind up, promise you. Behind this rhetoric there's a different reality. There is no sense on the part of the SNP of Scotland as a divided, unequal society. Yes, they will use the rhetoric of fairness. They will use the rhetoric of social justice, but these have become, in some ways, vacuous terms, empty terms. Terms that don't really connect. We're all for social justice, but what does it actually mean? And how are we going to achieve that? One of the great pitfalls, I think, of the Yes campaign more generally, I'm not saying this is true of everyone involved in it, is it had little recognition of the realities of working life in Scotland. But you would read somewhere that all the bad things that are happening in public services in the UK or in England with Scottish public services is a land of milk and honey. Well, hardly. There's countless workers have lost their jobs in recent years in the Scottish public sector, particularly local authorities. As you know, and I think they're speaking here at this conference, you've got homelessness care workers involved in strikes. What in this wonderful, beneficial, progressive Scotland, there's a strike going on. Indeed, you can look at Glasgow, every year since 1997, there has been a social worker care dispute of some kind or another. It is glorious, wonderful, everybody loves each other Scotland. Yeah? So you have this image of Scotland as a giant, I'm showing me each year, Trumpton, or Camberwick Green, everybody loves Woodstock, Scotland. But what is going on is something very, very different on the ground. You have Labour-controlled Glasgow City Council talking about ending 350 home care posts. There's 1,600 care workers in an arm's length, which is a nice way of saying privatised company, right, whose jobs, terms and conditions have been under attack in this beneficial, lovely Scotland. Yeah? So the SNP's vision of Scotland, yes, at one level it looks very benign, looks very progressive. We have a neoliberal vision of what Scotland should be. Let's make no bones about it. In some ways, it is a tartan third way. That what we can have is progressive economic growth tied with universal benefits. Now, of course, we would support universal benefits, we would support progressive welfare, but that's impossible based on a free market society where all you have to do is make Scotland much more progressive at the basis of the economy. Impossible. And with the exception of the National Health Service, the SNP are not opposed to privatisation. If they sign up for the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership with North America, the SNP says, let's defend the NHS of that, or NHS opt-out. What does that say for the rest of the public sector in Scotland? So you could find you used to come in buildings like this, you don't have UWS lecturers delivering classes, you have some privatised company doing it, and that's happening in universities in Britain today already. So the idea that Scotland is in some way immune from that is absolutely not true at all. So the SNP vision, I would say, is very, very limited in some ways. It doesn't really challenge the inequalities that exist within Scottish society. And I'm going to use a word here that I've got special permission from Ian and Michael to use, because you do go to some conferences and nobody talks about this word. The word is class. Is that okay? Can I use that word? Yeah? Yeah, we support that word? Well, class is completely missing out of the SNP language. Does it exist? You never hear Nicola Sturgeon or Alex Salmond or any other SNP minister talk about class. We'll talk about the euphemisms of class. We'll talk about the impoverished, the disadvantaged, the poor. But to actually talk about class, oh no. That's just a step far too far. So the idea of Scotland as a class society is not something that has been brought to the fore. And indeed that's one of the complaints and criticisms that could be made of the Yes campaign. Positive and progressive as it was, it didn't go far enough. It didn't challenge, for example, anti-trade union legislation, which works in Scotland as much as it works elsewhere in the UK. It didn't challenge vested interest. The SNP say nothing about taxing the rich or tackling the wealthy. From Scotland's not part of their vision at all. So the notion of class is completely absent. So, to conclude, one of the things that we would applaud, I think, with the rise of the SNP is that it does pose a serious political threat. Not just at the level of Scotland, but at a UK level. There's a lot of people seriously worried about the SNP in Scotland and across the UK, particularly in Westminster politics. We saw during the independence referendum that the British ruling class were in turmoil about the thought of Scotland leaving the UK. There's still turmoil about the rise of the SNP and what this might mean in the future. But the other side of that, you have this idea of Scotland as this progressive society. If only we had independence, everything would be fine. For the SNP, independence is an end in itself. Whereas for many of the rest of us, it was the beginning of a means to an end. It wasn't the end. So the idea that all we need is a Scottish welfare state and a Scottish state and everything else will be progressive is very naive. What about the economy? What about workers? What about wages? What about conditions? Totally off the radar, apart from simply saying workers should be treated fairly. But what does that actually mean? We support that, but again, it's quite a limited point. So finally, obviously I've focused on Scotland, as I said I would. There's huge interest in what's going on in Scotland, not just across the UK, Ireland, Western Europe and elsewhere. Because the implications of what happens here has lessons for other parts of the world. Of course, there's lessons that we in Scotland need to learn from other parts of the world. I think this is one of the great things about Swan, that is bringing people together from different parts of the world. So look at Scotland, learn from what's going on in Scotland, but look beyond some of the myths of Scotland that are projected by many people within Scotland, not least the SNP. This is as divided a society as a society which you come from yourself. But the independence movement has offered an alternative vision of something that could be better. The theme of the conference is about the politics of hope. And I think that many people who supported Scottish independence, the vast majority, are not Scottish nationalists. They supported independence. Why? Because it would hope that a new society could be created in Scotland. And to be honest, if we can create a new society in Scotland, that has huge benefits for people in other parts of the world. Lessons can be learned. So let me finish. This is my final slide up. Let me go back to 1919. Here's George Square, 1919. Same square represented by the image on the right hand side. Here are workers in 1919 flying the red flag. It's not the Scottish Saltire, it's a red flag. The British state was worried sick at a Bolshevik uprising was going to take place in Glasgow. What you don't see here, but within 500-600 yards of that, you've got the British Army with tanks ready to intervene if this blew up into an uprising. And here we have the image that I showed you at the start. Yes? Is that the image I showed you at the start? Maybe I should hold on to that. Well, it's not actually. This took place after the referendum. So what that shows is that the referendum has settled absolutely nothing. What it has fuelled, what it continues to fuel, and this is the positive thing about the whole independence debate, is the possibility that another Scotland is possible. So thank you for listening. I think we've got time for questions. Okay, cheers.